What happens when the most ordinary places become hunting grounds, and when the people we trust to protect us become the ones we should fear most? Let me know in the comments where you are watching from, and what is the current time there. Now, let me tell you about the worst night of my life. And the roadside diner that almost became my grave. This happened to me 3 years ago, in January of 2023. I am posting this because I need people to understand that predators do not always hide in dark alleys or abandoned buildings. Sometimes, they wear aprons and serve you coffee with a smile. Sometimes, they own the places where we stop for help. My name is irrelevant now, but what happened to me at that diner on Route 285 in New Mexico matters. It matters because the man who tried to kill me was never caught. It matters because there might be others like me, others who stopped at the wrong place at the wrong time and never made it home. I was driving from Minneapolis to Montana to start a new job, a marketing position at a small firm in Billings. The pay was not great, but it was a fresh start after a bad breakup and an even worse year. I had loaded everything I owned into my Honda Civic and hit the road on a Friday morning, planning to make the drive in 2 days with an overnight stop somewhere in South Dakota. But weather does not care about your plans. The blizzard hit around 8 p.m., somewhere between the South Dakota and Montana border. The weather app on my phone kept updating, each notification worse than the last. Winter storm warning. Travel not recommended. Whiteout conditions expected. I should have stopped earlier, should have found a hotel in the last town I passed, but I was stubborn. I thought I could make it to the next major city before the worst hit. I was wrong. By 9 p.m. I could barely see 10 feet in front of me. My windshield wipers were working overtime, scraping ice and snow in a rhythm that should have been comforting, but was not. The highway was empty. No cars ahead, none behind, just me and the endless white void pressing against my windows. My hands ached from gripping the steering wheel so tightly. That is when I saw the sign, barely visible through the snow. Route 285. Roadside cafe. Next exit. I nearly cried with relief. The exit ramp curved away from the highway, and within a quarter mile, I saw it, a small rectangular building with a faded red sign that read Maggie's Diner. The parking lot had been plowed recently, and there were 3 other vehicles parked outside. A white pickup truck, an older sedan with rust eating through the wheel wells, and a massive 18-wheeler rig parked at the far end of the lot. I pulled in next to the sedan and sat there for a moment, letting the engine run, letting myself breathe. The wind howled outside, rocking my car slightly. Through the diner windows, I could see warm yellow light and the shapes of people moving inside. It looked safe. It looked like salvation. I grabbed my purse, pulled my coat tighter, and ran through the snow to the entrance. The door chimed when I opened it, one of those old brass bells on a spring. The warmth inside hit me immediately, along with the smell of coffee and something frying on a grill. For a moment, everything felt normal, ordinary, safe. There were 5 people inside, not counting me. Behind the counter stood a woman in her 50s, gray hair pulled back in a tight bun, wearing a stained white apron over a blue flannel shirt. She looked up when I entered, and something flickered across her face. Not surprise exactly. Something else. Something I should have paid attention to. At the counter sat 2 men. The first was maybe 35, wearing a trucker's jacket with a patch that said Long Haul Logistics. He had the exhausted look of someone who had been driving for days. He did not look up when I entered, just kept stirring his coffee in slow, methodical circles. The second man made my skin crawl the instant I saw him. He was older, maybe 60, with skin so pale it looked almost gray in the fluorescent light. His eyes were sunken, ringed with dark circles that looked like bruises. He was bone-thin, his cheeks hollow, his hands skeletal where they rested on the counter. He was not eating, not drinking, just sitting there, staring at nothing. He looked half dead. At one of the booths sat a young couple, both in their 20s, huddled close together and speaking in low voices. They looked as trapped by the storm as I was. "Honey, you look frozen solid," the woman behind the counter said, her voice friendly but tired. "Take any seat you want. Coffee?" "Please," I said, shaking snow from my hair. "And maybe a menu?" "Sure thing." She grabbed a laminated menu from behind the counter and brought it over as I slid into a booth near the window. The vinyl seat was cracked and patched with duct tape, but it was warm and dry and not my car. I ordered a burger and fries, nothing fancy. While I waited, I watched the storm outside. The wind was getting worse, pushing walls of white across the parking lot. The highway beyond was completely invisible now, swallowed by the blizzard. "Looks like you are stuck here for a while," the waitress said, refilling my coffee cup. Her name tag read Anna. "Storm is not supposed to let up until morning at least." "Is there a hotel nearby?" I asked. She shook her head. "Closest one is 40 miles north, and Route 285 is closed now. Highway Patrol just called. No one is getting through tonight." My heart sank. "So, what do I do?" "Wait it out, honey. We have had people sleep in the booths before during bad weather. It is not comfortable, but it is warm and safe." She smiled, but it did not reach her eyes. "Better than freezing in your car." The young couple left about 20 minutes later, after the storm seemed calm slightly. I watched them through the window as they got into the white pickup truck and pulled out of the lot, their taillights disappearing into the snow within seconds. That left me, the trucker, the corpse-like man, and Anna. The trucker finished his meal in silence, paid his bill, and stood up. "Thanks, Anna," he muttered, not making eye contact with anyone. He zipped up his jacket and headed for the door. And then, there were three. I ate my burger slowly, trying to make it last, trying not to think about spending the night in this strange place with strangers. The pale man had not moved, had not even blinked as far as I could tell. Anna cleaned tables and refilled napkin dispensers, moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who had worked here for years. "You doing okay?" Anna asked, stopping by my booth. "Yeah," I lied. "Just not looking forward to sleeping sitting up." She laughed. "I hear you. I will keep the coffee coming at least. And there is a bathroom in the back if you need to freshen up." I nodded, grateful, and went back to my phone. No signal. Of course. No Wi-Fi either, according to the router I could see behind the counter. I was completely cut off. Around 11 p.m. I decided to use the bathroom. I stood up, my legs stiff from sitting, and walked past the counter toward the back hallway. The pale man's eyes followed me. I could feel his gaze like a physical weight on my back. The bathroom was small and outdated, with cracked tile and a mirror spotted with age. I washed my hands and splashed cold water on my face, trying to shake the unease that had settled in my chest. When I came back out, the pale man was gone. His coffee cup was still on the counter, still full and cold. His coat was missing from the hook by the door. I looked at Anna, who was wiping down the grill in the kitchen area. "Did that man leave?" I asked. She glanced up. "Oh, yeah. Headed out a few minutes ago." I walked to the window and looked out at the parking lot. The trucker's rig was gone now, but the sedan was still there. And there, barely visible through the swirling snow, was a figure walking toward the woods behind the diner. The pale man. He was not heading to a car. He was walking deliberately, slowly, toward the tree line, about 100 yards behind the building. His movements were strange, mechanical, like a puppet being pulled by strings. "That is weird," I said, half to myself. "What is weird?" Anna appeared at my shoulder, drying her hands on her apron. "That man. He is walking into the woods." She looked out the window. squinting. Maybe he's going to his car. We have people park out there sometimes when the lot is full. But the lot was not full. There were only 2 cars out there now. Mine and the sedan. I did not say anything else. What was there to say? Maybe the man was drunk, or high, or just strange. It was not my business. But 30 minutes later, when I looked outside again, the sedan was still there, and the pale man had not come back. I walked to the window again, pressing my face against the cold glass. Through the blizzard, I could make out the dark shape of the sedan, still parked in the same spot. If that was his car, why had not he driven away? Why had he walked into the woods? "Anna," I called. She came out from the back, wiping her hands. "That car out there, the sedan. Whose is it?" "One of the customers," she said, not looking at me. "Why?" "Because the man who was sitting there, the pale one, he walked into the woods half an hour ago and has not come back. And his car is still here." She looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw something in her expression. Fear. No, not fear exactly. Knowledge. She knew something I did not. "I am sure he is fine," she said, but her voice was too light, too forced. "Maybe he needed some air." "In a blizzard?" I said. "In the middle of the woods?" "People do strange things," she said, and walked back to the kitchen. I stood there, staring out at that sedan, and felt the first real spike of fear. Something was wrong. I went to the door and pulled it open, gasping as the wind slammed into me. The cold was shocking, knife-sharp and vicious. I could barely see 10 feet ahead. But I had to know. I had to see. I ran to the sedan and tried the door. Unlocked. The interior light came on, revealing an empty vehicle. No wallet, no phone, nothing. But on the passenger seat was a pair of work gloves and a receipt from a hardware store. Date stamped 3 days ago. This was his car. It had to be. So, where was he? I closed the door and turned toward the woods, squinting against the snow. The tree line was just dark shapes, like teeth against the white sky. And there, barely visible, I saw something. A trail. Footprints, already filling with snow but still distinct enough to follow. Going into the woods. I do not know what possessed me to follow them. Maybe curiosity. Maybe stupidity. But I walked slowly across the parking lot, my boots crunching in the fresh snow, following those footprints toward the trees. The woods were thick, pine trees crowding close together, their branches heavy with snow. The footprints led me about 30 yards in, weaving between trees, and then they just stopped. Right in the middle of a small clearing, they ended. No body. No sign of struggle. Just footprints that terminated in the middle of nowhere, as if the man had simply vanished into thin air. My heart was hammering now. This was not right. This was not natural. I turned to go back to the diner, and that is when I saw them. More footprints. But these were not the same. These were coming from deeper in the woods, from a different direction. Larger boots. And they led straight toward the diner, toward the parking lot, toward my car. I ran. I ran as fast as I could through the snow, slipping and stumbling, my breath coming in ragged gasps. When I reached the parking lot, I fumbled for my keys and jammed them into the door lock. Nothing happened. I turned the key again. Click. Nothing. No engine turnover. No dashboard lights. Nothing. I popped the hood with shaking hands and looked inside. I do not know much about cars, but I know enough to recognize when something is wrong. And there, clear as day, I could see it. The ignition wire had been cut. Not frayed or broken. Cut, clean, and deliberate. Someone had disabled my car. The pale man. I slammed the hood shut and ran back toward the diner, my mind racing. The footprints in the snow, the missing trucker, the sedan that was still here but whose owner had disappeared into the woods, the cut ignition wire. This was not an accident. This was not weather or bad luck. This was planned. I burst through the diner door, the bell jangling violently. Anna looked up from the counter, and I saw fear in her eyes now, real and undisguised. "Lock the door," I gasped. "Lock it now." "What? Why?" My car would not start. Someone cut the wires. That man, the pale one, he disabled my car. The words were tumbling out too fast, too panicked. "We need to call 911. Anna stared at me for a long moment, then moved quickly to the door and locked it. She pulled the shades down over the windows. Then she ran to the phone behind the counter and dialed. I could hear her voice, tense and rapid, giving our location and explaining the situation. I pressed myself against the wall, watching the windows, watching the door, my heart trying to pound its way out of my chest. That is when I saw him. The pale man was walking out of the woods again, moving with that same strange mechanical gait. And he was heading straight for the parking lot. Straight for the cars. Straight for the diner. "He is coming back," I whispered. Anna hung up the phone. "Police are on their way. 20 minutes, maybe 30 in this weather. 30 minutes. An eternity." The pale man reached the parking lot and stopped at the sedan. He opened the driver's door, reached inside and pulled out something. Even through the snow and distance I could see what it was. A tire iron. He closed the car door and turned toward the diner. And then he started walking toward us. I backed away from the window. "Anna, get away from there. Get to the back." But she did not move. She just stood there, staring out the window, her face white as paper. The man reached the front door and tried the handle. Locked. He tried it again, harder this time, rattling the frame. Then he stopped, and he looked directly at me through the window. His eyes were empty. Not angry, not crazed, just empty. Like looking into the eyes of something that used to be human, but was not anymore. He raised the tire iron and slammed it against the door. The metal frame dented. He hit it again. And again. "The back door," I said. "Is there a back door?" Anna finally moved, running toward the kitchen. I followed, my legs barely working. There was a back door, metal and heavy, with a deadbolt. It was already locked. "Do you have a weapon?" I asked. "A knife? Anything?" She reached under the counter and pulled out a baseball bat. It was old and scuffed, but solid. The pounding on the front door stopped. Silence. Anna and I stood there in the kitchen, holding our breath, listening. The wind howled outside. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. And somewhere, out in the storm, a monster walked. The back door handle rattled. We both jumped, and Anna raised the bat. The handle turned, but the deadbolt held. Then, nothing. "Maybe he left," Anna whispered. But I did not think so. I did not think he was the kind of predator who gave up. And then the window next to the front door shattered. Glass exploded inward, and a skeletal arm reached through, groping for the lock. Anna screamed. I grabbed her and pulled her toward the walk-in freezer in the back corner of the kitchen. "In here," I said. "Now." We crowded into the freezer and pulled the heavy door shut behind us. It was not meant to lock from the inside, but there was a latch we could hold. We pressed against it, our combined weight keeping it closed. The cold hit me immediately. My breath came out in white clouds. Anna was shaking, crying softly. We heard footsteps in the diner. Slow. Methodical. The crunch of glass under boots. He was inside. The footsteps moved through the dining area, into the kitchen. Pots and pans clattered as he searched. Closer. Closer. And then they stopped right outside the freezer door. The handle moved. We both pushed against the door with everything we had, our feet bracing against the shelves behind us. The handle rattled again, harder this time. The door shifted slightly, and freezing air whistled through the gap. "Help me!" Anna sobbed. "Please, help me!" I pushed harder, my arms burning, my fingers numb from cold and fear. The door shifted again, and through the crack, I saw him. That gray face. Those empty eyes. And then, from somewhere far away, I heard sirens. The man heard them too. The door stopped moving. The handle stopped rattling. Footsteps moving away. Running now. The crash of the front door being torn open. And then, nothing but the sirens getting closer. We waited in that freezer for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. When the police finally called out, when we heard voices identifying themselves as sheriff's deputies, Anna and I fell out of the freezer onto the kitchen floor, gasping and crying and barely able to stand. There were 4 deputies. They searched the diner and then went outside with flashlights, following tracks into the woods. Anna and I sat wrapped in blankets while a female deputy took our statements. They found him 40 minutes later. Not the pale man. The trucker. He was in the woods, about half a mile from the diner. Frozen, but not from the cold. The medical examiner would later determine he'd been dead for hours before the cold got to him. Strangled. His car's ignition had been cut, just like mine. The pale man had disabled it, waited for the trucker to go outside to warm up his vehicle, and ambushed him. The same thing he had planned to do to me. They found the white pickup truck abandoned 20 miles away, crashed into a ditch. The young couple inside were dead. The official report said they lost control in the storm, but the tire marks told a different story. They had been run off the road. Deliberately. The pale man's sedan was registered to a different name entirely, a name that traced back to a missing persons report filed 15 years ago. The real owner of that car had never been found. Probably never would be. Anna told the police everything she knew, which was not much. The man had been coming to the diner for weeks, always late at night, always sitting at the counter, never eating, never speaking much. She thought he was harmless. Creepy, but harmless. She had been wrong. They put out alerts across 3 states. They found his fingerprints in the diner, in my car, in the trucker's rig. But they never found him. The tracks led deep into the woods and then just stopped, as if he had walked into the storm and been swallowed whole. The diner closed 6 months later. Anna moved away, and I never heard from her again. I do not blame her for wanting to forget, but I cannot forget. I still see him sometimes, in my dreams. That gray face, those empty eyes, walking through snow that never ends, hunting for someone to kill. The police told me I was lucky. They said if the storm had not been so bad, if I had arrived even 15 minutes earlier or later, if Anna had not locked that door, if the police had not come when they did, I would be another missing persons case. Another name on a list. But here's the thing they did not tell me, the thing I figured out on my own. The pale man had been watching that diner for weeks. Watching the customers. Learning their patterns. Waiting for the perfect storm, literally and figuratively. A blizzard that would trap people there, cut off from help, cut off from escape. He was patient. He was methodical. And he is still out there. So, if you are ever driving late at night, and you see a roadside diner with a faded sign, and the parking lot seems too empty for the cars that are there, do not stop. Do not go inside. And if you see a pale man with empty eyes watching you from the counter, run. Because some predators do not hunt in forests or dark alleys. Some hunt in diners and gas stations and rest stops, places where we think we are safe. Places where we let our guard down. And sometimes, the people who disappear on lonely highways do not get lost in the storm. they get found by something worse. I survived that night, but I lost something there in that diner. The part of me that believed the world was fundamentally safe. The part that believed monsters were just stories. I know better now. And I hope you never have to learn the same lesson I did. What happens when delivering food becomes something far more sinister? Now, let me tell you about what happened to me during winter break last year, when I was delivering food through DoorDash in my hometown. I'm 22 years old. I go to college about 2 hours from where I grew up, but during winter break, I usually come home for a month. Money gets tight during the holidays, and my parents were not in a position to help much, so I picked up DoorDash deliveries to make some extra cash. Easy work, flexible hours, decent tips. Or so I thought. This happened on January 14th of last year. I remember the exact date because it was my grandmother's birthday, and I had spent the early evening with family. By the time I started my shift, it was already 9 p.m., and a massive snowstorm had just started. Most drivers had logged off for the night. That meant surge pricing, which meant better money for me. My first few deliveries were normal. Chinese food to an apartment complex. Pizza to a house near the high school. A late dinner order from Applebee's to an older couple who tipped me $20 in cash. It was going well. Then, around 11:45 p.m., I got the order. McDonald's. 2 meals, large fries, drinks. Pickup was easy. But when I looked at the delivery address, something felt wrong immediately. It was a rural route, about 15 minutes outside of town. Deep in the woods where I knew there were just a few scattered houses, hunting cabins, that kind of area. The address number seemed high, like it was far down that route, past where I thought any homes actually were. But the app showed the customer had tipped $15. For a $30 order, that was generous. And the instructions said to call when I arrived. Standard enough. I accepted it. The snow was coming down heavy by the time I left McDonald's. My windshield wipers were working overtime, and visibility was maybe 20 feet ahead of me. The roads were getting bad, but my car had good tires. I had driven in worse. The turn onto the rural route came up fast. I almost missed it. There was no street sign anymore, just a wooden post where one used to be. The route was narrow, barely wide enough for 2 cars to pass. Pine trees pressed in on both sides, their branches heavy with snow. I drove slowly, watching the GPS on my phone. 5 minutes down the route. Then 10. I had not seen a single house. No lights. No mailboxes. Just endless trees and darkness. The GPS showed I was getting close. 1,000 feet. Then 500. Then it said I had arrived. I stopped my car in the middle of the route. There was nothing here. No driveway. No house. No lights anywhere. Just snow-covered forest on both sides. I checked the address again. This was definitely the location. But there was absolutely nothing. That is when I called the customer. The number he had provided. It rang 4 times before he answered. Hello? The voice was male, deep, with a strange raspy quality. Hey, this is your DoorDash driver, I said. I am at the address you provided, but I do not see a house or driveway. Can you confirm the location? There was a pause. Then, you are at the right place. My driveway is there. You just cannot see it in the snow. It is on your left. I looked left. There was just forest and darkness. I am really not seeing it, I said. Can you turn on a porch light or something so I can find it? Another pause. Longer this time. I cannot do that right now, he said. The driveway is there. You might need to get out and look for it. It is a dirt driveway, goes back about a quarter mile to my house. I would come meet you, but I cannot leave right now. Something about the way he said I cannot leave right now made my skin crawl. Listen, I said, I can just leave the food here at the start of the route, and you can come get it when... No, he interrupted, his voice suddenly sharp. I need you to deliver it to my door. That is what I paid for. That is what delivery means. I sat there in my running car, the heater blowing, the wipers scraping across the windshield. Every instinct was telling me to just drop the food and leave. But I thought about the $15 tip. I thought about my rent. I thought about how many orders I had done without any problems. Okay, I heard myself say. I will look for the driveway. I put the car in park and turned on my emergency flashers. I grabbed my phone, switched on the flashlight, and stepped out into the snow. The cold hit me immediately. It was well below freezing, and the wind was cutting through my jacket. I walked along the left side of the route, shining my light into the trees, looking for any sign of a driveway. And then I saw it. He was right. There was a gap in the trees, barely visible. The snow had covered everything, making it almost impossible to distinguish the driveway from the surrounding forest. But there were two faint tire tracks, old ones, leading into the darkness. I walked back to my car and grabbed the McDonald's bag. For some reason, I left my keys in the ignition. The car was still running. I do not know why I did that. Maybe some part of me knew I might need to run. I started walking down the driveway with just my phone light. The trees closed in immediately. It was like walking into a tunnel. The snow was deeper here, no tire tracks anymore, like nobody had driven down this way in days. Maybe weeks. I had walked maybe 50 feet when I stopped. Something was wrong. Even beyond the obvious. I could not see any house lights ahead. No smoke from a chimney. No sounds except the wind and my own breathing. I pulled out my phone and called the number again. It rang once, then he picked up immediately. "Where are you?" he asked before I could speak. "I'm walking down your driveway," I said, "but I still do not see your house." "How much further is it?" "You are getting close," he said. His breathing sounded heavier. "Just keep walking. I can almost see you." That sentence stopped me cold. I could almost see you. I spun around, shining my light in all directions. There was nothing but trees and snow. But somewhere, he was watching me. "Look," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I am going to leave the food right here at the start of your driveway, and..." That is when I saw it. A light. Deep in the trees to my right, maybe 100 feet away. It was not a house light. It was a flashlight, pointed at me. Then it clicked off. "I see your light," the voice on the phone said. "You are so close now." I dropped the McDonald's bag in the snow. I turned and ran. Behind me, I heard branches cracking. Footsteps. Not on the driveway, but through the woods, moving fast. I ran harder than I have ever run in my life. My phone was still in my hand, its light bouncing wildly. I could see my car ahead, emergency lights still flashing. 50 feet. 30 feet. 20. I yanked the door open, threw myself inside, slammed it shut, and hit the lock button. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel. I threw the car into drive and floored it. As I pulled away, I looked in my rearview mirror. For just a second, my headlights illuminated someone standing at the edge of the route. A man. Tall. Wearing dark clothes. Just standing there, watching me drive away. I drove back to town doing 60 miles per hour on snow-covered roads. I was shaking. I was crying. I could not breathe right. When I got to a gas station, I pulled in under the lights and just sat there. That is when I noticed my car felt weird. I got out to look. My back driver's side tire was flat. Not just low. Completely flat. I walked around to inspect it. There was a clean cut in the sidewall. Not from running over something. Someone had slashed it. While I was walking down that driveway, someone had cut my tire, probably planning to trap me there when I tried to drive away. I called the police from the gas station. They sent an officer who took a report. They drove out to the address. They said there was no house at that location. The route I had driven down dead ended about a mile in at an old logging site. Nobody lived there. Nobody had lived there in decades. The phone number was a burner. Untraceable. The DoorDash account was created that same day with a stolen credit card. The order was a trap. The whole thing was a trap. The officer told me I was the third delivery driver to report something similar in the county over the past 2 years. One driver had gone down a similar rural driveway and never came back. They found her car 3 days later, abandoned, with a slashed tire. She has never been found. I do not do DoorDash anymore. I do not do any delivery services. I work in a campus bookstore now, where there are cameras and people and light. But here is what I cannot stop thinking about. That man knew I was coming. He had been watching that route, waiting for headlights. He had cut my tire while I was walking into the woods. If I had gone deeper, if I had walked that full quarter mile he told me to walk, if I had not run when I did, what was waiting at the end of that driveway? The police said they searched the area but found nothing. No structures. No recent tracks beyond my own. Nothing. But I know what I saw. That light in the trees. That figure at the route's edge. And I remember what he said on the phone. I can almost see you. He was there. Somewhere in those woods. He had set up a perfect trap. An isolated location. A snowstorm to keep other people away. A delivery driver who was just trying to make rent. And I walked right into it. Sometimes I wonder how many others did not run fast enough. How many delivery drivers, rideshare drivers, pizza guys, took orders to strange addresses and never came back. Sometimes I search the news for similar cases. I find them. More than I want to. Delivery drivers disappearing. Found weeks later. Or never found at all. The DoorDash company sent me an email saying they had deactivated the fraudulent account. They offered me a $50 credit as an apology. Like that somehow made it okay. I still have nightmares about that driveway. About the snow. About the light in the trees. About the sound of branches cracking behind me as I ran. My therapist says it will get better with time. But I do not think it will. Because every time I see someone making a delivery, every time I see a DoorDash driver or an Uber Eats car, I want to run up to them and grab them and tell them, do not go to weird addresses. Do not walk into the woods. Do not trust a voice on the phone telling you to come deeper into the darkness. Because someone is out there. Someone who knows how to exploit the gig economy. Someone who knows delivery drivers are desperate for tips. Someone who is patient and methodical and hunting. I survived because of instinct. Because I ran. Because my car was still running. But I think about her. That other driver. The one who never came back. And I wonder, did she see the same light I did? Did she hear the same footsteps? Did she run? Or did she walk that full quarter mile, carrying someone's McDonald's order, into the darkness at the end of that driveway? I will never know. But I hope you remember this if you ever do delivery work. If you ever get an order to a strange address. If you ever feel that instinct telling you something is wrong. Listen to it. Drop the food. Leave. Because some deliveries are not worth making. Some tips are not worth earning. Some driveways lead to places you cannot come back from. And somewhere, in the woods outside my hometown, a man is still placing orders. Still setting traps. Still waiting for the next driver who needs money badly enough to walk into the darkness. I just hope it is not you. Tonight, we will discover what happens when a winter walk reveals something that cannot be explained. Something that lingers in the mind, long after the moment has passed. Now let me tell you about what I witnessed that December night, and the questions that still haunt me 3 years later. My name does not matter. What matters is what I saw. What Kyle, Ricky, and I all saw that night on Miller Lake, 20 miles outside of Asheville, North Carolina. What matters is the missing child whose face I recognized on the television 2 days later. What matters is that I did not call the police, and I have to live with that choice every single day of my life. This happened in December of 2021. I was 26 years old, working third shift at a warehouse distribution center. Kyle and Ricky were my roommates, both of them unemployed at the time, both of them dealing with their own demons. We had developed this tradition of late-night walks when I got home from work around 3 in the morning. The walks helped me decompress, helped me shed the tension of 8 hours loading trucks in the freezing cold. Miller Lake was our usual destination. It is a small lake, maybe half a mile across, surrounded by sparse pine woods and abandoned summer cabins. During winter, the lake freezes solid by mid-November, and by December, the ice is thick enough to support a full-grown man without any risk of breaking through. The local kids use it for ice skating during the day. At night, it belongs to the darkness, the cold, and to whatever decides to venture out onto that white expanse. The night it happened, the moon was full. I remember that detail with absolute clarity because it illuminated everything, turning the frozen lake into a vast white mirror that reflected the sky. Snow was falling heavily, large wet flakes that stuck to our jackets and our hair. The temperature was around 15 degrees Fahrenheit, cold enough that our breath crystallized in the air, cold enough that we could only stay outside for maybe 45 minutes before we would need to head back. We parked Kyle's truck at the old boat launch and walked out onto the ice. The snow was already several inches deep on the frozen surface, and our footsteps made that distinctive crunching sound that only happens in extreme cold. We walked maybe 100 feet from shore, far enough that the tree line became a dark smudge against the lighter sky, close enough that we could still see the truck waiting for us. That is when Ricky saw it first. He stopped walking and grabbed my arm. His hand was trembling, though I could not tell if that was from cold or from fear. He pointed toward the western shore, toward the tree line where the pines grew thickest. There was something moving there. Something large and dark and hunched over. It emerged from between two trees and stepped onto the ice with a slow, deliberate gait that sent immediate warning signals through my nervous system. The shape was wrong. The proportions were wrong. Everything about it triggered that primal instinct that tells you to run, to hide, to get away from the predator. Kyle said it first. That is a bear. We had all heard stories about black bears in the area. They were common enough in the Appalachian foothills, though seeing one in winter was unusual. They should have been hibernating. But there it was, or so we thought, moving across the ice toward us with that distinctive bear gait, rocking from side to side, massive and dark against the white snow. Then it stood up. Bears do that sometimes, stand on their hind legs to get a better view or to appear more threatening. But this one stood up and stayed up. It walked on 2 legs. It moved with a human stride. And in the moonlight, I could see that the proportions were all wrong for a bear. The limbs were too long. The head was too small. That is not a bear, I whispered. My voice sounded strange in my own ears, too loud and too quiet at the same time. We stood there, the 3 of us, frozen in place while the thing moved closer. It was perhaps 75 feet away now, close enough that I could see details. It was a person wearing a bear costume. The suit was old and matted, the kind you might see at a roadside attraction or a failing theme park. The head hung at an odd angle, and through the mesh mouth, I could see the pale oval of a human face. The person in the bear suit was dragging something behind them. A black garbage bag, small and compact, tied with a rope that they held in one gloved hand. The rope trailed behind them across the snow, and the bag scraped and bumped over the uneven surface of the ice. None of us spoke. None of us moved. We simply watched as this person in this grotesque bear costume walked to a spot about 50 feet from where we stood and stopped. They set down the bag carefully, almost tenderly. Then, they knelt on the ice. The person reached into their pocket and pulled out something that glinted in the moonlight. It was a rock, maybe the size of a softball, dark and heavy-looking. They raised it above their head and brought it down hard onto the ice. The sound echoed across the lake, a sharp crack that made me flinch. They did it again, and again, and again. Each strike rang out in the silence like a gunshot. They were trying to break through the ice. I realized this with a cold certainty that had nothing to do with the temperature. They were trying to create a hole in the ice, trying to push that black bag into the water below, trying to hide something where it would not be found until spring thaw, if ever. Ricky grabbed my sleeve and started backing away. Kyle was already moving toward the shore, his boots crunching too loudly in the snow. I should have moved with them. I should have run. But I stood there, transfixed, watching this person in this bear suit smashing at the frozen lake with methodical determination. That is when the person looked up and saw us. Even from that distance, even through the darkness and the falling snow, I felt the weight of that gaze. The person stood up slowly, still holding the rock. They turned to face us completely. And then they yelled, "Hey!" Just that single word. Just "hey!" called out across the frozen lake in a voice that was masculine, rough, and filled with something I cannot quite describe. Not anger exactly. Not fear. Something else. Something darker. That single word broke the spell. We ran. All three of us, at the same time, scrambling toward the shore with panic overriding any sense of coordination. I slipped twice on the ice, catching myself with my hands, the cold burning through my gloves. Behind us, I could hear footsteps. Heavy, pounding footsteps that were getting closer. We reached the shore and crashed through the underbrush toward the parking area. Kyle got to the truck first and had the engine started before Ricky and I even reached the doors. We threw ourselves inside, and Kyle peeled out, tires spinning on the frozen ground before finally catching and launching us down the access road. None of us looked back. None of us wanted to see if the person in the bear suit had followed us off the ice. We drove in silence, the heater blasting, condensation fogging up the windows. When we finally reached our apartment, we went inside and locked every door and window. We did not talk about what we had seen. We did not discuss calling the police. I showered and went to bed. I tried to tell myself it was nothing. Some weirdo dumping trash in the lake, nothing more. Some eccentric local with a taste for the theatrical. Nothing to worry about. Nothing that required intervention. But I could not sleep. I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling and thought about that black garbage bag. About how carefully the person had set it down. About how small it was. About how desperately they had been trying to break through the ice. 2 days later, I was sitting in the living room with my mother, who had come to visit for the weekend. She lives about 40 miles away, and she likes to check in on me every couple of weeks. We were watching the local evening news, not really paying attention, when a story came on that made my blood stop moving in my veins. A child had been reported missing. 7-year-old Emma Chen, from a neighborhood about 15 miles from Miller Lake. She had disappeared from her front yard while playing in the snow on the afternoon of December 14th. That was the same day I had my shift. The same day Kyle, Ricky, and I took our walk. The same night we saw the person in the bear suit. Emma's photograph filled the screen. She was a beautiful child, with dark hair and a bright smile. She was wearing a pink winter coat in the photo. Her parents were beside themselves. The police were searching. The community was organizing volunteer search parties. I sat there, My hands clenched so tightly that my fingernails cut into my palms. I felt my mother looking at me, asking if I was okay. I said I was fine. I was not fine. I knew, with a certainty that made me feel physically sick, that I knew where Emma Chen was. I knew that she was in that black garbage bag. I knew that she was under the ice at Miller Lake, waiting to be found. I should have called the police right then. I should have told them what I saw. I should have described the person in the bear suit, described the location, described everything. But I did not. I told myself I was not sure. I told myself I was jumping to conclusions. I told myself that the police would handle it, that they would search the lake, that they would find her without my help. But, mostly, I did not call because I was afraid. Afraid of being involved. Afraid of being questioned. Afraid of what might happen if the person in the bear suit found out I had seen them. Afraid of having to testify, of having to relive that night, of having to admit that I had stood there and watched and done nothing. The search for Emma Chen continued for 2 weeks. They found nothing. The police searched the woods, searched abandoned buildings, searched everywhere except Miller Lake. The case went cold. Her parents held press conferences, begging for information, begging for their daughter to come home. I watched every one of them. I watched, and I said nothing. It has been 3 years now. Emma Chen is still listed as missing. Her case is still open. Her parents still hold vigils on her birthday and on the anniversary of her disappearance. And I still have not called the police. I tell myself that it is too late now. That too much time has passed. That my information would not help. That I am not even certain of what I saw. But I know the truth. I know that I am complicit. I know that I chose my own comfort, my own safety, over a child's life. I know that somewhere under the ice at Miller Lake, or perhaps somewhere else entirely if the ice never broke, there is evidence that could have brought closure to a family in agony. Kyle and Ricky do not live with me anymore. We never spoke about that night again, not once. When Kyle moved out 6 months later, we shook hands and said generic goodbyes. When Ricky left a year after that, we did not even bother with pleasantries. We all knew what we had seen. We all knew what we had failed to do. Sometimes I drive past Miller Lake. Not often. Maybe once or twice a year. I never stop. I never get out of the car. I just slow down slightly as I pass the old boat launch and look out at the ice, when there is ice, or at the dark water, when there is not. I research missing children cases obsessively now. I read every article, watch every documentary, follow every update. I look for patterns. I look for similarities. I look for other children who went missing near frozen lakes, other reports of people in animal costumes, behaving strangely. I have found 3 cases in the past 2 years that have similar elements. None of them near Asheville. None of them conclusive. I tell myself that if I see something suspicious again, I will call immediately. I tell myself that I learned my lesson. I tell myself that I will not be a coward next time. But I do not know if that is true. I do not know what I would do if I found myself in the same situation again. What I do know is that Emma Chen deserves better. Her family deserves better. They deserve to know what happened. They deserve closure. They deserve justice. And they do not have any of those things because I was too afraid to speak up. So I am speaking up now, in the only way I can. I am telling this story. I am putting it out there. And if anyone else has seen something similar, if anyone else has information about Emma Chen, or about a person in a bear costume near Miller Lake in December of 2021, please call the police. Please do what I should have done 3 years ago. Because that image stays with me. The person in the bear suit, kneeling on the ice, smashing at the frozen surface with desperate determination. The small black garbage bag sitting nearby. The cold moonlight making everything too bright and too clear. And that single word called across the distance between us. Hey! Just hey. Like they knew me. Like they wanted me to come closer. like they had been waiting for someone to witness what they were doing. I do not sleep well anymore. When I do sleep, I dream about frozen lakes. I dream about bear costumes hanging in dark closets. I dream about black garbage bags and children's pink winter coats. I dream about the phone call I never made, the confession I never gave, the child I never helped save. This is my confession now. This is my attempt at redemption, however inadequate. This is me saying to Emma Chen's family, to the police, to anyone who might listen, that I saw something that night. I saw something, and I did nothing, and I will carry that guilt for the rest of my life. If you are listening to this, if you are in the Asheville area, if you have any information at all, please come forward. Please do not make the same mistake I made. Please do not let fear silence you when a child's life might be at stake. Because I can tell you, from personal experience, that the fear of getting involved is nothing compared to the horror of knowing you could have helped and chose not to. Nothing compares to watching a family suffer on television, knowing you hold a piece of their puzzle and refusing to give it to them. Nothing compares to the weight of that silence. I still see that bear costume in my nightmares. I still hear that single word echoing across the frozen lake. I still see that small black bag, and I wonder what was inside it, even though I know the answer. I have always known the answer. The stone tape theory suggests that traumatic events can be imprinted on the environment, recorded in the very molecules of stone and ice and cold air, waiting to be played back to those sensitive enough to perceive them. If that is true, then Miller Lake has absorbed something terrible. The ice remembers. The trees remember. The darkness remembers. And I remember. God help me, I remember everything. And I did nothing. If you see something, say something. That phrase gets thrown around so casually, turned into a cliché, robbed of its meaning. But it means something. It means that silence is not neutral. It means that witnessing is not passive. It means that when you see something wrong and you do nothing, you become part of the wrong. I became part of the wrong 3 years ago, on a frozen lake in North Carolina. I watched a person in a bear suit try to dispose of what I believe was a child's body, and I ran away, and I kept my mouth shut, and now I have to live with that forever. Do not be like me. Do not let fear make you complicit. Do not prioritize your comfort over someone else's life. Because the cost is higher than you can possibly imagine. The cost is your humanity. The cost is your ability to look at yourself in the mirror without seeing a coward staring back. Emma Chen deserves better. All missing children deserve better. They deserve adults who will speak up when they see something wrong. They deserve a world where witnesses come forward instead of running away. They deserve justice. I cannot give her that now. But maybe, if someone else saw something that night, maybe, if this confession reaches the right person, maybe there is still a chance. Maybe the ice will give up its secrets. Maybe the truth will surface, however cold it has become. That is my only hope now. That somehow, this story will help. That somehow my 3-year late confession will lead to answers. That somehow, speaking up now will matter, even though it should have mattered 3 years ago. I do not expect forgiveness. I do not deserve it. I just want people to know the truth. I want people to learn from my mistake. I want people to understand that silence has consequences, that witnesses have responsibilities, that sometimes doing the right thing means putting yourself in uncomfortable positions. The person in the bear suit is still out there. I know they are. People like that do not stop. They escalate. They repeat. They evolve. And somewhere, there might be another frozen lake, another black garbage bag, another child whose life could be saved if someone would just speak up. Do not be silent. Do not be like me. Do not let 3 years pass before you find the courage to do what you should have done immediately. Emma Chen was 7 years old. She liked drawing pictures and playing in the snow. She had her whole life ahead of her, and I might have been able to help find her, and I chose not to. That is my burden to carry. Make sure it never becomes yours. Tonight we explore what happens when a simple noise complaint transforms into something far more sinister, when the neighbor who waves from his porch becomes the predator who stalks from the shadows. Now, let me tell you about Sarah Mitchell and the 8 months that nearly destroyed her. I moved into the little yellow house on Birchwood Lane in March of 2023, right after my divorce was finalized. I was 34 years old, working as a nurse at the county hospital, and I desperately needed somewhere quiet to rebuild my life. The house was perfect, small but manageable, with a patchy front lawn and a backyard that backed up against a stretch of woods. The neighborhood felt safe, the kind of place where people waved from their porches and nobody locked their doors during the day. My only neighbor for about 50 yards was a man named Earl Pritchard, who lived in a gray ranch-style home to my left. For the first 3 months, we barely exchanged more than a nod. He seemed like a typical retired guy, maybe late 60s, always tinkering with something in his garage or sitting on his porch with a beer. I had no reason to think anything would ever go wrong. The problem started because of his dog, a massive Rottweiler mix named Duke that had to weigh at least 120 pounds. Earl let that animal roam free constantly, no leash, no fence, nothing to stop it from wandering wherever it pleased. The first few times Duke showed up in my yard, I just shooed him away and figured Earl would get the message. But then Duke started getting aggressive, barking and lunging at me when I tried to get to my own car in the morning. One Saturday, in late August, I was bringing groceries in from my trunk when Duke came charging across the yard, teeth bared, hackles raised like a wild thing. I barely made it inside before he slammed against my screen door hard enough to dent the frame. My hands had red scratches from scrambling to get inside, and my heart was still pounding hours later when I finally called animal control. I remember feeling nervous about filing that complaint, wondering if I was overreacting. But I told myself I was just being a responsible neighbor, that Earl would understand once someone explained the rules to him. Looking at it now, I realized that phone call was the moment everything changed. Animal control came out 2 days later on a Monday morning. I watched from my kitchen window as the officer spoke with Earl on his porch for maybe 10 minutes. Earl kept his arms crossed the whole time, his body rigid, occasionally gesturing toward my house with sharp, angry movements. When the officer left, Earl stood there staring at my window for a long moment before going back inside. That night, Duke was finally on a chain in Earl's backyard, and I actually felt relieved, like the whole situation had been resolved with minimal drama. I went to bed early, exhausted from a double shift, and slept better than I had in weeks. The next morning, I woke up around 6 to get ready for work, made my coffee, and stepped out onto my front porch to check the weather like I always did. That was when I saw it. Sitting perfectly centered on top of my wooden fence post, right where my property met the road, was a small cardboard box. It was old and weathered, the kind you might find in someone's garage, and it was open at the top. I walked over slowly, my bare feet cold against the dewy grass. When I got close enough to look inside, my breath caught in my throat. The box was filled with loose ammunition, maybe 40 or 50 rounds of what looked like shotgun shells mixed with smaller caliber bullets, all jumbled together like someone had dumped them from a drawer. There was no note, no explanation, nothing to indicate where it came from or why it was there. But I knew. I stood there in my pajamas, the morning birds singing like nothing was wrong, and I felt this cold knot form in my chest that would not go away for months. I took pictures with my phone, my fingers clumsy and stiff, then brought the box inside and set it on my kitchen counter. Part of me wanted to believe it was some kind of mistake, that maybe a hunter had left it there by accident, or some teenagers were playing a prank. But the placement was too deliberate, too precise. Right at the entrance to my property, where I would absolutely see it first thing. I was watering the small patch of tomatoes I had planted near my back porch that evening, trying to force some normalcy into my day, when I heard Earl's screen door slam shut. I looked up and saw him walking toward the fence line that separated our properties, moving with this slow, deliberate pace that made my stomach tighten. He stopped about 10 feet away from me, close enough that I could see the gray stubble on his jaw and the deep lines around his pale blue eyes. For a moment, neither of us said anything. Then he smiled, but it was the kind of smile that had no warmth in it whatsoever, just a slight pulling back of his lips that showed his yellow teeth. His voice was calm, almost friendly, when he finally spoke. He said that he hoped I was settling in okay, that it was important for neighbors to look out for each other in a place this remote. Then he tilted his head slightly, like he was studying me, and added that accidents happen when people stir up trouble, that it was really easy for things to go wrong when folks stuck their noses where they did not belong. He said it casually, the way you might comment on the weather, and then he just turned around and walked back to his house without waiting for me to respond. I stood there with the garden hose still running, water pooling around my feet, unable to move or think clearly for what felt like several minutes. That night around 2 a.m, I heard something that pulled me fully awake, a rhythmic banging sound coming from somewhere outside. I crept to my bedroom window and peered through the curtains, and what I saw made me press my hand over my mouth to keep from making a sound. Earl was in his backyard, illuminated by the glow of a work light he had set up on a ladder. He was hammering something onto a tall wooden post, working methodically despite the late hour. I watched him for maybe 20 minutes, trying to understand what he was doing, until he finally stepped back, and I saw it clearly. He had installed a massive floodlight on that post, the industrial kind you see at construction sites, and it was angled directly at my house. Specifically, it was pointed straight at my bedroom window. But that was not the worst part. The worst part was what I noticed when he turned to gather his tools. Strapped across his back, black metal gleaming under the work light, was a pump-action shotgun. He was not even trying to hide it. He wanted me to see. The floodlight came on every single night at exactly 10:30, blazing through my curtains like a second sun, making it impossible to sleep without stuffing towels against the window frame and wearing a sleep mask. I bought blackout curtains from the hardware store in town, but even those could not fully block the intensity of that light. It was like living inside a fishbowl, knowing that at any moment he could be out there watching, that shotgun probably within arm's reach. I called the police on the 3rd day, explained everything from the ammunition to the threat to the floodlight situation. A deputy came out, a young guy named Fowler, who seemed sympathetic, but kept using phrases like civil matter and no direct threat and freedom to install lights on his own property. He said he would go talk to Earl, maybe encourage him to be more neighborly, but there was nothing illegal about outdoor lighting or owning firearms. That night, Earl added a second floodlight, this one aimed at my driveway, so bright that it triggered the automatic sensor on my porch light and kept it burning all night long. I started changing my routines, leaving for work earlier and coming home later, parking on the far side of my house where the lights could not reach, entering through my back door like a thief in my own home. My coworkers noticed the dark circles under my eyes, the way I jumped at sudden noises, and I made up excuses about insomnia and stress from the divorce. One Thursday evening, I came home from a 12-hour shift to find a dead rabbit on my front steps. Its neck was clearly broken, the body still warm, and it had been placed right in front of my door with its glassy eyes staring up at the sky. There was no way to prove Earl had put it there. There was no way to prove anything. I buried the rabbit in my backyard, with shaking hands, and cried for the first time since this whole nightmare began, not just from fear, but from the overwhelming helplessness of being trapped in a situation with no visible way out. The footsteps came next, heavy and deliberate in the woods behind my house around 3 a.m. I would hear branches snapping, the slow crunch of leaves under boots, circling the perimeter of my property in the darkness. When I finally mustered the courage to peer through my back window one night, I saw the beam of a flashlight sweeping methodically through the trees, pausing occasionally as if marking locations, planning approaches. It was a Saturday night in late September when things finally came to a head. I had gone to bed early, around 9, because the exhaustion had become so overwhelming that I could barely function. The blackout curtains were drawn tight, and I had earplugs in, my only defense against the nightly assault of light and anxiety. I do not know what time it was when the sound cut through my sleep, but I will never forget the way it felt to be ripped awake by the unmistakable crack of a gunshot. It was close, terrifyingly close, somewhere right behind my house near the tree line. I scrambled out of bed and crawled to the window, my whole body trembling as I pulled back the edge of the curtain just enough to see outside. The floodlights were on, painting everything in harsh white light, and I could see Earl walking slowly back toward his house from the direction of my property line. The shotgun was in his hands, barrel pointed at the ground, and even from that distance, I could see the faint wisp of smoke curling from the muzzle. He walked calmly, unhurried, like a man who had just finished a routine chore. When he reached his porch, he turned and looked directly at my window, and even though I knew he probably could not see me through the curtains, I felt completely exposed. 2 deputies arrived within 20 minutes when I called 911. Sergeant Hartley found it almost immediately. A splintered hole in the wooden door of my garden shed, the edges still fresh and pale against the weathered gray paint. He dug the slug out with a pocket knife while his partner took photographs, and he confirmed it was from a 12-gauge shotgun, same type Earl carried openly every single day. But when they went to talk to Earl, he denied everything. Said he had been inside all night watching television. Said he had not fired his weapon in weeks. Said maybe someone else had come through the woods and taken a shot at a coyote or a deer. The deputies searched his property with his permission and found nothing incriminating. No spent shell casings, no recently fired weapon that they could test. Earl had clearly cleaned the shotgun and disposed of any evidence before they arrived. Sergeant Hartley told me he believed me, that he could see the pattern of harassment in everything I had documented. But believing and proving were 2 different things. Without witnesses or physical evidence linking Earl to the shot, there was nothing they could charge him with. He suggested I consider staying somewhere else for a while, maybe with family or friends, until things cooled down. The next morning, I did something I probably should have done weeks earlier. I called my older brother Vincent, who lived about 4 hours away in Pennsylvania, and told him everything. He drove down that same day with his truck already loaded with boxes, and by sunset, we had packed up everything I owned and loaded it into a rental trailer. I did not bother trying to sell the house through normal channels. I contacted a company that buys properties fast for cash, took a loss of almost $40,000, and signed the papers 3 days later. It felt like surrender, like Earl had won, and in a way, I suppose he had. But I also knew that staying there meant waiting for something worse to happen. Something that might not leave me alive to file another police report. The last time I saw Earl Pritchard, he was standing on his porch with that shotgun, resting against his shoulder, watching Vincent and me load the final boxes into the truck. He did not say a word, did not wave or smile or make any gesture at all. He just watched with those pale blue eyes, his face completely blank, as I climbed into the passenger seat and we pulled away from Birchwood Lane for the last time. I moved in with Vincent and his wife temporarily, found a new nursing job 2 months later, and eventually bought a small condo in a busy suburb where my neighbors are separated by walls, and I can hear the comforting sounds of traffic at night. I still check the locks 3 times before bed. I still flinch at loud noises. And sometimes when I close my eyes, I can still see that wisp of smoke curling from the barrel of his gun and feel his gaze fixed on my window through the darkness. They say trust your gut. I did not. Not soon enough. I will never make that mistake again. But What haunts me most is not what Earl did to me. It is thinking about the last tenant, the one who left in a hurry before I moved in, and the next person who will eventually buy that house at the end of Birchwood Lane, drawn in by the quiet street and the affordable price, with no idea that their neighbor is a predator who knows exactly how to terrorize without ever breaking the law. Because men like Earl Pritchard do not just stop. They wait. They watch. They find new targets. And somewhere out there right now, someone else is probably moving into a house next to a man just like him, unpacking boxes and thinking they have found somewhere safe, somewhere peaceful, somewhere they can finally call home. We will explore tonight what happens when isolation becomes a predator's advantage, when a winter storm transforms your sanctuary into a hunting ground. Now, let me tell you about what happened to me 2 years ago, during a blizzard that changed everything I thought I knew about safety. My name is David, and I work from home as a software developer. 2 years ago, during a major winter storm a few days before Christmas, I was finishing up a project that had kept me working late into the night. The weather service had been warning about the storm for days. A massive system moving down from Canada, they said. Sustained winds of 35 miles per hour or greater, with considerable falling snow reducing visibility to less than a quarter mile. A proper blizzard warning, the kind that shuts down entire regions. I remember checking the forecast that afternoon, watching the radar on my computer screen. The angry red and purple mass was bearing down on our area like something alive, something hungry. I live alone in a 2-story house on the outskirts of town, about a quarter mile from my nearest neighbor. It is the kind of place where you can work in peace, where silence is a comfort rather than something unsettling. At least, that is what I used to think. By 8 that evening, the storm had arrived in full force. Snow fell in thick, swirling curtains that made the streetlight at the end of my driveway look like a faint star in a white void. The wind screamed against the windows with a sound like freight trains, rattling the glass in its frames. Every few minutes, I heard the sharp crack of tree branches snapping under the weight of ice and snow somewhere in the darkness. I had done everything right. The house was well stocked with food and water. The generator was fueled and ready. Extra firewood sat stacked by the wood stove. My phone was charged, though I noticed the cell signal had already dropped to a single flickering bar. The landline was still working, at least for now. I felt prepared, almost smug about my readiness for whatever the storm might bring. That confidence lasted until I saw the flashlight beam outside my window. It was just past 10 when I noticed it. A pale yellow light, moving slowly through the snow, sweeping back and forth across my front yard, like someone searching for something. At first, I thought it might be a neighbor checking on me, though that made little sense. No one would be walking around in these conditions unless something was seriously wrong. I watched the beam for several minutes, my hand hovering over the phone. The light moved with purpose, tracing a deliberate path from the street toward the side of my house, then disappearing around the corner. I told myself it was probably someone whose car had broken down, looking for help. But even as I thought it, I knew something was wrong. The way the light moved was too methodical, too controlled. And why would someone walk past my front door without knocking? I forced myself to dismiss it and return to my desk. The project deadline was tomorrow, and I needed to focus. But I found myself glancing toward the window every few seconds, watching for that light to reappear. It did not. At least, not where I could see it. 20 minutes later, everything went dark. The sudden absence of light and sound was absolute disorienting. My computer screen died. The hum of the refrigerator stopped. The forced air heat clicked off with a final wheeze. Even the faint glow from the digital clock on the microwave vanished, leaving me in pitch blackness broken only by the pale white chaos visible through the windows. Power outages during blizzards are common. I knew this. The weight of ice on power lines, trees falling across transformers, the strain of everyone running electric heat at maximum capacity. I had prepared for exactly this scenario. But I had not prepared for the sound that came next. A loud thud from somewhere inside the house. Deep, heavy, deliberate. Not the crack of settling wood or the pop of contracting metal. This was the sound of something substantial moving, or falling, or being moved. I grabbed my flashlight from the desk drawer and stood frozen for a moment, listening. The storm roared outside, but inside, the house had become eerily quiet. Too quiet, as if even the walls were holding their breath. Another sound. Softer this time. A scraping, like something being dragged across the floor below me. It came from the direction of the basement. My rational mind tried to provide explanations. Something had fallen off a shelf when the power went out. The furnace had made a noise as it shut down. An animal had gotten into the crawl space. But none of these explanations felt right. They did not account for the flashlight I had seen outside. They did not explain the deliberate quality of the sounds. I made my way toward the stairs, the flashlight beam cutting narrow slices through the darkness. The house felt different now, transformed by the absence of electricity into something unfamiliar. Shadows lurked in corners I passed every day. The floorboards creaked under my feet with sounds I had never noticed before. As I reached the top of the stairs, I heard it again. Footsteps. Slow, careful footsteps moving across the ground floor. Not the random settling of an old house. These were the sounds of someone walking, someone who knew exactly where they were going. I froze, one hand on the banister, every muscle in my body tensing. Someone was in my house. Someone who had entered while I was upstairs, while the storm raged outside and swallowed any sound they might have made. But every door was locked. Every window secure. I had checked them all before the storm arrived, part of my meticulous preparation routine. The footsteps continued, moving with purpose toward the basement door. I heard it open, the familiar squeak of hinges I had been meaning to oil for months. Then silence, followed by the sound of someone descending the basement stairs. I should have called the police then. Should have locked myself in my bedroom and dialed 911 and waited for help to arrive. But something stopped me. Some combination of disbelief and territorial instinct and stubborn refusal to believe what my ears were telling me. Instead, I moved down the stairs as quietly as I could, gripping the flashlight like a weapon. My hands were shaking, but I forced myself to keep moving. If someone was in my basement, I needed to know who they were and what they wanted. The basement door stood open, a rectangle of absolute blackness at the end of the hallway. I approached it slowly, listening for any sound from below. Nothing. Whoever had gone down there had stopped moving, or was moving so quietly I could not hear them over the pounding of my own heart. I reached the doorway and shone my light down the stairs. The beam illuminated the first few steps, then faded into shadow. I could see nothing suspicious. No movement. No sign of anyone. But I knew someone was down there. I could feel it, a certainty that bypassed logic and settled deep in my gut. I took one step down, then another. The stairs creaked under my weight, announcing my presence to whoever waited below. By the third step, I knew I was making a mistake. This was exactly how people died in horror movies. By walking stupidly into dark basements while killers waited in the shadows. I stopped, my better judgment finally overriding my curiosity. I needed to get out of this house. Get to my car, drive to a neighbor, call the police from somewhere safe. That is when the footsteps returned. But not from the basement. From behind me, in the hallway I had just walked through. I spun around, the flashlight beam sweeping wildly across the walls. For just a moment, I caught a glimpse of a figure standing at the top of the stairs. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing dark clothing that made them almost invisible in the shadows. They moved the instant the light hit them, disappearing around the corner toward my office. My office, where my phone was, where my only way to call for help sat on the desk, now unreachable. The trap closed around me with the efficiency of something well planned. Someone in the basement, someone upstairs, and me caught between them. The power cut deliberately, not by the storm. The careful approach, the knowledge of my house layout, the timing. This was not a random break-in. This was something else. Something worse. I ran. Up the stairs, toward the back of the house, away from whoever had been in the hallway. Behind me, I heard rapid footsteps on the basement stairs. They were no longer trying to be quiet. I reached the kitchen and grabbed for the back door. Locked. My fingers fumbled with the deadbolt, precious seconds wasting as I tried to turn it. The footsteps were getting closer, coming from 2 directions now, converging on my location. The lock finally turned. I yanked the door open and stumbled out into the storm. The cold hit me like a physical blow. I was wearing only jeans and a sweater, no coat, no boots. The snow was already knee-deep, and the wind drove it horizontally into my face with stinging force. Visibility was perhaps 20 feet. Beyond that, just white chaos. But I could not go back inside. Could not face whoever had invaded my home, whoever had planned this so carefully. I pushed through the snow toward my detached garage, hoping desperately that I had left it unlocked. If I could get to my car, I could escape. Drive to the police station, to a neighbor, anywhere but here. The garage door opened. Thank God. I practically fell inside, gasping, shaking from cold and adrenaline. My car sat waiting, keys in my pocket. I could make it. I was going to make it. That is when I saw him. Or rather, saw the outline of someone standing behind my car, perfectly still, as if they had been waiting for me to arrive. The figure made no move to approach, just stood there in the darkness of the garage, blocking my path to the driver's side door. A second figure appeared in the garage doorway behind me, silhouetted against the white storm. Tall, calm, unhurried. I was trapped again, caught between them in the confined space. They did not speak, did not move, just waited, with the patient stillness of predators who knew their prey had nowhere left to run. In that moment, I understood something that still haunts me. This was not about robbery, not about random violence. Someone had studied me, learned my routines, waited for the perfect conditions. A blizzard that would cut off help, make escape difficult, erase evidence. They knew I would be home alone, knew exactly how I would react. Research on predatory stalkers suggests they often engage in extensive surveillance of their targets. They gather information about routines, vulnerabilities, access points. The victim's home or workspace may be broken into beforehand, not to steal, but to learn, to plan. Predatory stalking is especially dangerous because it is often a precursor to violence. These individuals view their victims as possessions or targets for control, and they demonstrate a callous disregard for human life that makes them particularly lethal. But I did not know these statistics then. I only knew that I was going to die in my own garage while the worst blizzard in 20 years raged outside. What saved me was something I still cannot fully explain. The figure behind my car moved slightly, shifting their weight, and in that tiny movement, I saw my chance. I lunged forward, diving past them toward the back corner of the garage where I kept my snowblower. I grabbed it, yanking it forward with strength I did not know I possessed, tipping it over directly into the path of the figure behind me. They stumbled, cursed, the first sound either of them had made, and in that moment, I ran. Out the side door of the garage, into the blinding storm, with no plan except to put distance between myself and those patient, silent figures. The snow was deeper here, drifted against the side of the garage. I floundered through it, falling twice, each time forcing myself back to my feet. Behind me, I heard nothing. The storm swallowed all sound. They could have been 10 feet away, or 100. I had no way to know. I ran toward the neighbor's house a quarter-mile away. Running through knee-deep snow in a blizzard wearing inadequate clothing is an excellent way to die from exposure. Hypothermia sets in quickly when you are wet and exhausted, and the wind chill is driving temperatures far below zero. I could feel my fingers going numb, my face burning with cold that would soon fade to dangerous numbness. But I kept running, because freezing to death seemed preferable to whatever those figures had planned. I do not remember most of that journey. The storm and exhaustion and terror blend together into a white nightmare of stumbling and falling and forcing myself forward. At some point, I saw lights ahead. The neighbor's house, windows glowing yellow against the white chaos. I crawled the last 20 yards, my legs finally giving out, collapsing on their porch and pounding on the door with what little strength I had left. They found me there, nearly unconscious from cold and shock. They brought me inside, wrapped me in blankets, called the police. The storm was so bad it took officers almost an hour to reach us. By the time they searched my house, whoever had been there was gone, vanished back into the storm that had provided them such perfect cover. The investigation found evidence of careful planning. The power had not failed naturally. Someone had cut the lines to my house specifically, leaving the rest of the street unaffected. They found marks in the snow showing where two individuals had circled my property multiple times over several hours before the break-in. Tool marks on my basement window frame suggested that was their entry point, though how they had known to target that specific window, hidden from view, easy to open, suggested prior surveillance. Most disturbing were the things they left behind. In my office, they found my desk drawer open, my personal documents spread out and examined. In my bedroom closet, clothing had been moved, as if someone had been going through it. The detective told me it appeared they were inside my house for at least 30 minutes before I noticed them. 30 minutes of walking through my rooms, looking at my belongings, learning about me while I worked oblivious upstairs. They never caught who did it. No fingerprints, no DNA evidence useful for identification. 2 sets of large boot prints in the snow, but the storm had partially filled them before investigators could make detailed impressions. The detective said it fit the pattern of predatory stalkers who target isolated individuals during natural disasters or severe weather events. Power outages and blizzards provide perfect cover. Roads become impassable. Emergency response times stretch to hours. Physical evidence gets buried under snow. The victim's home or workspace may be broken into, he told me, reading from a report. Information or our physical property may be stolen. Invasion tactics escalate the intrusiveness. Some stalkers do this to gather intelligence, to learn routines, to identify vulnerabilities. You were being studied. He did not say for what purpose. He did not need to. I sold that house 3 months later. Took a substantial loss, did not care. I could not stay in a place where someone had walked through my rooms, examined my life, planned God knows what while a blizzard raged outside. I moved to the city, to an apartment building with 24-hour security and neighbors whose walls I can hear through mine. The lack of privacy feels comforting now, rather than intrusive. But 2 years later, I still think about that night. I think about the patient stillness of those figures in my garage, the way they moved with complete confidence through my darkened house, the careful planning, the attention to detail, the knowledge of exactly when I would be most vulnerable. I think about the fact that they were never caught, that somewhere out there, 2 people who plan to do something terrible to me are living their lives unpunished. Maybe they have moved on to someone else. Maybe they are waiting for another perfect storm. Research on stalking behavior tells us that these individuals rarely stop on their own. They adapt, they learn, they find new targets. The physical and psychological costs on victims are immense. Many victims change their entire lives, just as I did. They move, they install security systems, they develop hypervigilance that never quite fades. The violation of knowing that someone invaded your safe space, studied you, planned something terrible. That fear never completely disappears. I installed 3 deadbolts on my apartment door. I have a security system with cameras and motion sensors. I keep my phone charged at all times, with emergency numbers programmed on speed dial. When blizzard warnings appear on the weather forecast, I feel my chest tighten with irrational panic. But what haunts me most are the questions I will never have answered. How long had they been watching me? What did they know about my life, my routine, my vulnerabilities? And the worst question of all, the one that wakes me at 3 in the morning in a cold sweat. What exactly were they planning to do once they had me trapped in that garage? Sometimes, when it snows, I look out my window at the white falling darkness, and I remember. I remember the flashlight beams sweeping across my yard, the careful footsteps in my hallway, the silent figures waiting in the garage with the patience of apex predators. The police told me I was lucky, that I survived something that could have ended very differently. And they are right. I am lucky. But luck is a terrible thing to depend on in the face of someone who has studied you, planned for you, waited for the perfect conditions to make you disappear. I will never know who they were. But they knew me. They knew everything about me. And somewhere out there, in the places where winter storms rage and power lines fall and isolation becomes absolute, they might be watching someone else. Planning. Waiting. Because that is what predators do. They study their prey. They wait for the perfect conditions. They create the trap and then spring it with the calm efficiency of something that has done this before. And when the storm clears and the sun rises on a landscape transformed by snow, the only evidence left behind are footprints slowly filling with fresh powder, disappearing as if nothing had ever happened at all. Tonight, when you lock your doors and check your windows and settle in against whatever storm may be brewing outside, remember this. Preparation is good. Vigilance is better. But sometimes, the thing you need to fear most is not the storm itself. It is what the storm allows to move unseen in the darkness it creates. Tonight, we explore what happens when a perfect ski trip turns into something you cannot explain. Before we begin this horror story, horror that crawls under your skin and lingers, and if you enjoy content like this, consider subscribing. It helps me bring you more stories like this. Let me know in the comments where you are watching from, and what is the current time there. Now, let me tell you about what happened to me a few winters ago, when I was 21 and skiing in Vermont with 3 friends. This was back in February of 2017. We had driven up from Boston for a weekend trip to Stowe Mountain Resort. Me, Jason, Marcus, and Devin. We had been friends since high school, and this was supposed to be our annual ski tradition. Just 4 guys, cheap beer, and the slopes. Nothing complicated. The first day was perfect. Cold, clear skies, brush powder. We spent most of Saturday on the main trails, doing the usual runs, nothing too adventurous. That evening at the lodge, we were sitting by the fire when we met them. 2 women, mid-20s maybe, incredibly beautiful. One introduced herself as Taylor, the other as Devin, which we all thought was funny since my friend Devin was standing right there. They were friendly, easy to talk to. Taylor had this laugh that made everyone around her laugh too. Devin was quieter, but had these intense green eyes that seemed to see right through you. They said they were locals, knew the mountain like the back of their hands. They told us about the popular trails, the best places to eat in town, the usual tourist advice. Then Taylor leaned in close and lowered her voice. She told us about a place called Devil's Forest. Secluded glade trail on the backside of the mountain, she said. Untouched powder, no crowds, just pure skiing. The kind of place the locals kept to themselves. She said they were heading there tomorrow morning, early, before the lifts even opened. If we wanted to join them, we should meet them at the base of the North Peak lift at 6:30 a.m. Looking back, I should have questioned why they were inviting 4 strangers to their secret spot. But we were young, stupid, and honestly just excited that 2 attractive women wanted to spend time with us. So we agreed. The next morning we met them right on time. The sky was still dark, that deep purple before dawn. The mountain was eerily quiet without the usual crowds. Taylor and Devon were waiting for us, dressed in sleek black ski gear that looked expensive. Professional. They greeted us warmly and led us to a service route that wound behind the main resort. We hiked for about 20 minutes, our skis over our shoulders, following a narrow trail through dense pine trees. The snow was deeper here, untouched. Our breath created clouds in the freezing air. Nobody else was around. Just the 6 of us, and the sound of snow crunching under our boots. When we finally reached the glade entrance, marked by 2 twisted pine trees forming a natural archway, Taylor pulled out an unmarked bottle from her backpack. "Vodka," she said, "to celebrate." She took a long drink and passed it to Jason. He did not hesitate, taking a big gulp and passing it to Marcus. Marcus did the same. When it reached me, something felt off. Maybe it was the way both women were watching us so intently. Maybe it was how eager they seemed for us to drink. Maybe it was just instinct. But when I lifted the bottle to my lips, I barely let any liquid touch them. I faked a swallow, grimaced like it burned, and passed it to my friend Devon. He drank deeply. We started skiing down into the glade. The trees were tight. The powder was perfect, exactly as they had promised. But after about 5 minutes, Jason stopped suddenly. He said he felt dizzy. Marcus laughed at him, but then Marcus stopped too, swaying slightly. He said the trees were spinning. My friend Devon made it maybe another 30 seconds before he just sat down in the snow. He looked confused, like he could not remember why we were there. I stopped, my heart racing. I looked back uphill and saw Taylor and Devon, the women, standing at the top of the run. They were not skiing anymore. They were just watching. Waiting. That is when I knew the drink had been drugged. Jason collapsed next, falling face first into the powder. I tried to reach him, but Marcus grabbed my jacket, mumbling something incoherent before his eyes rolled back. I watched all 3 of my friends pass out within seconds of each other. I pretended to stumble, to be affected too. I fell to my knees in the snow, letting my head hang down, peeking through my hair. The 2 women skied down slowly, gracefully. They stopped a few feet away from us. "That was faster than usual," Taylor said. Her voice had changed. The warmth was gone. It was cold, businesslike. "The big one took a lot," the other Devon replied. "We might need to adjust the dosas next time." Next time. They had done this before. I stayed perfectly still, controlling my breathing, trying to look unconscious. Through my eyelashes, I watched them move around my friends, checking their pockets, looking at their equipment. They were assessing, calculating. That is when I heard the sound of a motor. An engine. Through the trees, I could see lights approaching. A van, somehow driving through the forest on what must have been a service route. How had they gotten a vehicle up here? 2 men got out. Big, rough-looking. They greeted Taylor and Devon like this was a business transaction. Which I suppose it was. 3 good ones, Taylor said, gesturing to my unconscious friends. "One's iffy." She pointed at me. One of the men walked over and kicked my leg. Hard. I did not react, staying completely limp. He grunted and moved on. I listened as they discussed taking the ski equipment. High-end gear, worth thousands. They were not interested in wallets or phones. Too traceable. But skis, boots, goggles, those could be sold easily, no questions asked. They spent maybe 10 minutes loading my friend's equipment into the van. I heard them struggling with Jason, who was the biggest. They dragged him through the snow. I heard Marcus moan softly, but He did not wake up. Then the engine started again. The lights moved away through the trees. They were leaving. I waited. The hardest 30 minutes of my life, lying in the freezing snow, terrified they would come back, terrified my friends would freeze to death before they woke up, terrified I had made the wrong choice by not trying to fight or run. Finally, when I was sure they were gone, I got up. My legs were numb. My hands were shaking. I crawled over to Devon first. I shook him hard, slapped his face. Nothing. His skin was cold. Too cold. I tried Marcus next, same thing. Then Jason. I was starting to panic, thinking about hypothermia, about brain damage from whatever drug they had used. That is when Marcus coughed. A weak, sputtering cough, but it was something. I focused on him, shaking him harder, yelling his name. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused and confused. "What?" he mumbled. "Where?" "We need to get help," I told him. "Can you stand?" It took another 20 minutes before Marcus could even sit up properly. By then, Devon was starting to stir too. Jason took longer, much longer. I was seriously considering leaving them and skiing down for help when his eyes finally opened. They did not remember much. Drinking from the bottle, starting to ski, then nothing. Waking up in the snow with me hovering over them, our equipment gone. We made our way down the mountain on foot. It took 3 hours. We were hypothermic, exhausted, terrified. At the base, we reported everything to resort security, who called the police. The investigation went nowhere. The women had given us fake names. Nobody matching their descriptions worked at the resort or was registered as staying there. The service route we had hiked was rarely used and had no cameras. The glade area was technically off-limits, which meant the resort had plausible deniability. Our ski equipment was never recovered. The police seemed to think we had been targeted by an organized theft ring. Tourists with expensive gear, isolated location, carefully planned. They said we were lucky. Lucky it was just robbery. Lucky we had not been hurt. Lucky I had not drunk enough to pass out too. But here's what keeps me awake at night. What keeps me checking over my shoulder even now, years later. I cannot stop thinking about what Taylor said. Next time. How many other groups had they done this to? How many other young men had they lured into those woods? And what happened to the ones who did not have someone who stayed conscious? What happened when everyone drank from that bottle? I have searched online, looking for similar reports. I have found a few. Skiers who disappeared on mountains in Vermont, in Colorado, in Montana. Some were found eventually, dead from exposure. Some were never found at all. The police told us we were lucky it was just robbery. But I do not think it was just robbery. I think we stumbled into something much darker. I think those woods have seen things. I think that van has carried away more than just ski equipment. I have not been skiing since. My friends have not either. We do not talk about it much, but I know they think about it. I know they remember Taylor's laugh, Devon's green eyes, the way the trees closed in around us. I know they wonder, just like I do, what would have happened if I had drunk from that bottle too? Some people tell me to move on, that we survived, that it is over. But I do not think it is over. I think somewhere, on some mountain, Taylor and Devon are still out there. Still smiling. Still offering unmarked bottles to strangers. Still hunting. And I think about the men in that van. I think about what they said as they loaded my unconscious friends into it. One of them laughed. Just a short, cold laugh. And he said something I could not quite hear. But I think he said, "This makes 23. 23? What? 23 groups? 23 people? I will never know. But I hope to God I never find out."